Hi, I wanted to jump in real quick and do this video about sugar in rosé because of some confusion I've been hearing out there about it. For example, a couple days ago I was having lunch with some friends and one of my friends is on a sugar-free diet. And her sister looked at her and goes, why are you drinking rosé if you're on a sugar-free diet? And my friend was drinking a rosé from Bandol. And so I turned to her sister and I said, well, the rosé that she's drinking doesn't have any sugar in it. And her sister said, well, how can that be? Why, if it doesn't have sugar in it, why do doctors tell patients with diabetes not to drink wine? And I was like, ooh, I should do a video about this because there is some confusion out there about sugar in wine. So if you're interested in this topic and you want to know if you can drink wine if you're on a sugar-free or carb-free diet, keep watching. So let me just start by saying that Rosé from Provence is, with Rosé from Provence, you don't have to worry about sugar. There's little to no sugar, little to no carbs, and it has a glycemic index of 0. But not all wine is sugar-free, of course. So let's first talk about sugar in wine. Sugar in wine is known as residual sugar because it's the sugar that's left over after fermentation. So fermentation obviously is the process by which the yeast converts sugar into alcohol. And, there's sugar in grape juice, right? Fructose and glucose, mostly. And so the yeast eat that sugar and the byproduct of that consumption is alcohol. So why would fermentation stop? Well, either it stops because it ate all the sugar. There's nothing left to eat, right? That's mostly the case of what happens with Provence wines. That's why there's so little sugar in it, because the yeast ate it all. Sometimes the fermentation could stop because the alcohol level gets to a high enough point where it actually becomes toxic to the yeast. And the yeast could die off because of the alcohol toxicity before it has a chance to convert all the sugar. And so that leftover sugar is the residual sugar. Now, sometimes the winemaker can actually stop the fermentation before all the sugar is converted. That's just a preference of the style that he's looking for. Or sometimes after the fermentation stops, the winemaker can even add more sugar to the wine, depending on, again, the style that he's looking for. So with AOP Provence wines, and I'm talking about red, white, or rosé, there are legal limits imposed by the appellation laws on how much sugar can be in that wine. And the laws require that AOP Provence wines can have no more than 4 grams of residual sugar per liter, which is one bottle is only 3/4 of a liter. So that's 3 grams of residual sugar in a whole bottle of Provence, AOP Provence wine. But again, that's the upper legal limit. Most Provence wines have a lot less than that. For example, my wine, Solière, it's an AOP Coteaux de Provence, and the 2018 vintage only has less than 0.3 grams of residual sugar per liter. So in an entire bottle of Solière, that's like 0.2 grams in the entire bottle. I mean, for all practical purposes, sugar-free and carb-free, okay? And it has a glycemic index of 0. And most wines from Provence are going to be similar. They're going to be a lot less than the legal limit. So what about wines from other countries or appellations? Or what about wines from this region that are not AOP? Maybe they're IGP, or maybe that just says Vin de France. What about them? Well, the laws vary from region to region and country to country, and some regions and countries don't limit the amount of sugar at all. One general guideline that you can go by are the international standards governing wine labeling. Okay, these standards say that if a wine is labeled as dry, it cannot have more than 4 grams of residual sugar per liter, or 3 grams for a 750 milliliter bottle. Now, there are exceptions to this. For example, if the wine has a certain level of acidity, it might have a little bit more sugar in it, okay? But, in general, for the most part, if a wine is labeled as dry, and I'm talking about still wines, if a still wine is labeled as dry, it's going to have no more than 4 grams of residual sugar per liter. So that isn't very much, okay? That's 3 grams in a bottle, a normal size 750 milliliter bottle, which if you think that there's 5 glasses in a bottle, that's only 0.6 grams of sugar per glass. So that's not very much. If you're watching your sugar, your carbs, you don't have much to worry about there. Another way to tell is to look it up on the winery's website or just call the winery and ask them. Obviously, you're not going to find it on their label. Some wines do put this information on their website, but not very many. I mean, usually the easiest way is just to call the winery and ask. Now, it's not always easy to just tell by the taste either, because some wines with sugar in them taste dry because of the acidity, or some wines that are bone dry, like rosés from Provence, you might get some like fruity notes or candy notes like confected fruit or marshmallow, and that might trick your brain into perceiving sweetness even though there's no sugar. So can't always tell by the taste. You know what? The safest bet is just to drink AOP Provence wines, because then you don't have to worry about it. All of them, the rosés, the reds, the whites, they're going to be either low sugar or no sugar, and it's mandated by law. Okay? Now, if you're in a wine shop and you're looking for an AOP Provence wine, what do you need to look for on the label to make sure it's really AOP Provence? Okay, first of all, AOP means appellation d'origine protégée, and that needs to be on the label somewhere, okay? It needs to say that it's AOP. And how do you know that it's from Provence? Because not all wine appellations in France have these low sugar limits, right? There are some sweet wines from France. So how do you know that it's AOP Provence? Well, there are 9 different Provence appellations, but the ones you're most likely to find outside of France are Côtes de Provence, Coteaux d'Aix-en-Provence, which is sometimes called Coteaux d'Aix, Coteaux Varois en Provence, which is sometimes just called Coteaux Varois, and Bandol. Okay, if you see one of these 4 appellations on the label, then you know it's from Provence. Now there are other Provence appellations, but they're so small that it's really rare to find them outside of France. I'll put them in the comments if you want the full list. Now, what if it says just Provence on the label, but it doesn't specify, what appellation it's from? It just says Provence. Well, that's still AOP, because only AOP Provence wines are allowed to put that word Provence on their label. So if it has the word Provence on the label, you know it's AOP and you know it's from Provence. If it doesn't say AOP on it, and it doesn't say Provence anywhere, and it doesn't say Bandol or one of the other appellations that I've listed, and it just says, wine from the Mediterranean or Vin de France or something like that, then it's not AOP. And in that case, there would be no legal limit on the amount of sugar that it can have. And so the only really way to know would be just to call the winery. Almost impossible to know in any other way. I hope you've enjoyed this little video. I'd like to start doing more of these, so tell me in the comments which topics you'd like me to cover next. And until then, bonne journée et à bientôt. Have a great day and see you soon.